Independence or death. Over 2 centuries ago, a young prince raised his sword to the sky, and with a single cry, gave birth to a nation. That day, Brazil ceased to be a colony and became an empire. Here is the story of the choice that shook 2 continents. Chapter 1. A Kingdom Beyond the Seas. Part 1. The Flight of the Portuguese Court, December 1807. A heavy rain falls on Lisbon. The wind from the Tagus whistles between the masts of ships anchored in the port, carrying with it the scent of salt and fear. The night is thick, almost tangible, and beneath this maritime darkness, a crowd presses onto the docks. Shadowy figures, nobles, soldiers, servants, children, jostle in the mud and puddles. Trunks, chests, paintings, musical instruments, books, everything that can be saved from the grandeur of a threatened kingdom is hurriedly piled onto massive galleons. For on this night, the entire nation of Portugal is leaving Europe. From the other side of the Atlantic, the drums of Napoleon's war resound. His troops, led by General João, are approaching Lisbon. Imperial France, invincible on the continent, has demanded that Portugal break its alliance with England. King João VI hesitated, wavered, hoped still that the storm would pass. But when French armies finally cross the borders, he has no choice: flee or fall. Thus, in an unprecedented decision, the entire Portuguese court embarks for the New World. It is not merely a king in exile, it is an entire empire uprooting itself from its soil to cross the ocean. On the dock, Queen Maria I, aged, ill, raves in her litter. The ladies in waiting weep silently. Priests bless the sea, tracing crosses in the damp air. Sailors shout orders as waves crash against the hulls. And amidst the tumult, Prince Regent João, pale and dressed in black, casts a final glance toward the sleeping city. He knows that by dawn, Lisbon will be taken. But he also knows that beyond the horizon, another Portugal awaits. Vast, tropical, almost mythical, Brazil. On November 29th at dawn, the fleet weighs anchor. 14 royal ships, escorted by British vessels, set forth into the unknown. The cannons of São Julião Fort salute the departure. Their echoes reverberate over the hills of Belém like mournful knells. The Tagus, shrouded in mist, slowly opens onto the Atlantic. And as Lisbon's silhouette fades into the rain, a kingdom shifts into another dimension of time. The crossing will be long. 54 days of raging ocean, illness, prayers, and dreams. The courtiers, crammed into the holds, struggle with the swell. Noble ladies, accustomed to palace marble, collapse on the damp wooden decks. The missionaries pray. The slaves, meanwhile, gaze at the sea in silence. They know this royal exile will change nothing about their chains. But amidst this tossed humanity, a strange idea grows. The center of the Portuguese world is shifting. The Atlantic is no longer an ocean of separation, but a bridge. And Rio de Janeiro, that distant southern city, will soon become the capital of a European empire in America, a first in the history of the modern world. The days pass, identical and endless. The sea seems intent on swallowing the ships. The sails creak, the ropes howl, the officers fix their eyes on the stars to hold the course. In his cabin, Prince João, pious and indecisive, reflects. His mind wavers between guilt and premonition. Did he flee out of weakness, or did he save his kingdom from certain ruin? The priests assure him it was providence that guided him, that God opened the way to a new Eden. But the rain, relentlessly beating against the portholes, seems to answer otherwise. At the other end of the ship, musicians sometimes try to play to calm spirits. Timid waltzes, nostalgic fados. Their notes mingle with the crash of waves like a prayer for survival. The nights are long, punctuated by visions. Some sailors claim to hear the voices of shipwrecked souls from centuries past, or see, in the black swell, the ghostly lanterns of ancient caravels. On March 7, 1808, after nearly 2 months at sea, the fleet finally sights the Sugarloaf and the green hills of Rio de Janeiro. The air is warm, fragrant, alive with birds and light. The inhabitants rush to the beaches to see this surreal armada, ships laden with pale courtiers, bishops, nobles dressed in velvet, exhausted servants, and in their midst, the King of Portugal, disembarking not as a conqueror, but as a crowned fugitive. But at that moment, no one yet grasps the magnitude of this event, for this landing marks the beginning of an unprecedented metamorphosis. Portugal ceases to be a European kingdom and becomes a tropical empire. Rio prepares to receive royalty. Houses are requisitioned, streets hastily paved, palaces improvised. The small colonial city suddenly becomes a capital. And in this upheaval, a new wind blows over Brazil. The people watch, curious, these strangers dressed in silk and gold. The slaves carry their luggage, musicians play Portuguese airs in the narrow streets. Beneath the coconut palms, the court ladies fan themselves and murmur, "Is this, then, the throne of the King of Portugal?" That night, on the illuminated bay, welcoming fires rise into the sky. Their reflections mingle with the calm water's surface. And in the trembling light, João VI contemplates his new kingdom. Perhaps he already understands that this shift of power, however temporary it seems, will have irreversible consequences. For in this vast and free land, in these endless forests, in this new warmth, Brazil will begin to dream of existing for itself. Part 2. Rio becomes the capital of the Portuguese Empire, Rio de Janeiro, March 1808. The heat is dense, almost alive. The air smells of salt, sugarcane, and wet wood. On the bay, the royal ships sway lazily, draped in Portuguese flags. Above the tranquil waters, the jungle-covered hills seem to silently observe the improbable event unfolding, the transfer of an entire kingdom to another continent. From the beaches to the city's alleys, a rumor spreads through the crowd. Slaves, colonists, priests, merchants, indigenous people, all strain to see this miracle of exile with their own eyes. The Portuguese court, driven out by Napoleon's armies, has settled here, at the heart of the tropics. And with it, all of Europe disembarks. Its customs, its intrigues, its ambitions, its fear. The galleons anchored in the bay brim with treasures, carved furniture from Lisbon, entire libraries, musical instruments, works of art, tapestries embroidered with gold. Everything is unloaded in haste. Soldiers carry crates of archives, monks bear holy relics, secretaries haul chests full of royal documents. Everything must be replaced, reorganized, transplanted, as if Lisbon must be reborn here in the tropical humidity. The inhabitants of Rio watch these new masters from across the sea with astonishment. The Portuguese ladies, pale and adorned with lace, fan themselves with difficulty under the relentless sun. The statesmen sweat in their velvet uniforms. The contrast is stark. This people of the northern Atlantic suddenly discovers an exuberant nature, powerful scents, a harsh light. And little by little, in this confusion, another Portugal begins to take shape. A Portugal hybridized, tropical, blended with exile and splendor. From the first weeks, Prince Regent João understands that his survival depends on one thing: transforming Rio into a capital worthy of an empire. He immediately orders a series of unprecedented reforms. The ports, previously closed to foreigners, are open to international trade. The English, allies of the king, arrive with cargoes of machines, books, textiles. The docks come alive, fortunes are made and lost with the rhythm of the ships. Brazil, once a mere exploited colony, becomes the beating heart of a kingdom in reconstruction. In the old viceroy's palace, João establishes his court. The salons are redecorated, the gardens expanded, the staircases covered with European carpets. Ministers come and go in narrow corridors, carrying dossiers sealed with red wax. Academies, printing presses, military schools, a natural history museum, a royal library are created. It is new effervescence, European modernity grafted onto Brazilian soil. But this spectacular transformation comes at a cost. To accommodate the nobles, local families are evicted from their homes. The city's wealthiest houses are confiscated to house ministers and their families. The people murmur in the streets. Slaves whisper among themselves that the newcomers are just more masters. For many, this arrival is no miracle. It is merely a change of oppressors. Yet something profound is happening. For the first time, Brazilians are in direct contact with royal power. They see their streets become the center of the Lusitanian world. They hear talk of laws, printing presses, progress, freedom. And without anyone yet realizing it, a new consciousness begins to germinate. Every evening on the Guanabara Bay, festivities are held to celebrate the king's presence. Musicians play European waltzes under palm trees. Fireworks burst in the warm sky, and nobles gaze, fascinated, at the southern stars they had never seen before. To them, everything is strange. The inverted constellations, the winterless nights, the cries of monkeys in the forest, the heavy scents of tropical flowers. It is another planet, another kingdom, and in this unreal setting, the Portuguese court floats between nostalgia and wonder. Prince João, pious and cautious, rarely leaves his palace. He fears fevers, the crowd, the sea. But he receives, listens, commands. Each decree, each reform brings Brazil a little closer to the status of a modern nation. He creates the Bank of Brazil, establishes courts, develops the administration. The country, once governed from Lisbon, begins to govern itself on its own soil. Unknowingly, João lays the foundations for an independence he did not intend. The king's presence transforms everything: the arts, politics, society. Local artisans are promoted, foreign artists arrive, printers set up shop. Intellectuals, previously censored by the metropolis, can finally breathe. They publish newspapers, debate philosophy, translate Rousseau and Montesquieu. The words liberty, nation, sovereignty circulate in cafes and salons. Far from stifling Brazil, the court awakens it without meaning to. But in the alleys, behind the freshly painted facades, misery persists. Slaves carry the silks of the ladies. Soldiers sleep on the bare ground. The poor gaze in astonishment at this opulence from elsewhere. The contrast between royal splendor and the hardship of the people is immense. And already, in the nocturnal murmurs, one senses that this forced coexistence cannot last forever. At dusk, when the bells toll the Angelus, Rio glows with 1,000 lights. The galleons in the port shine like floating palaces. In the salons, Lisbon is spoken of as a distant, almost forgotten dream. And in the silence of the tropical night, an invisible change takes place. The center of Portuguese power is no longer in Europe. It beats now here, under the southern stars. And as the cicadas sing, as the sea gently laps against the docks, Brazil begins to breathe as a capital. The local elites grow accustomed to governing, deciding, discussing state affairs. The Portuguese soldiers mingle with Brazilian troops. The boundaries between colonizers and colonized slowly blur. In the humidity of tropical nights, a new empire takes shape, quietly, without revolt, carried by the slow drift of history. Part 3. Birth of a New Brazilian Consciousness. Time has passed. It is 1810. 2 years have elapsed since the court's arrival in Rio de Janeiro. The city is no longer quite the same. Its alleys are livelier, its ports noisier, its markets vaster. Everywhere, one feels the movement of a world in transformation. But beneath this tumult of appearances, a deeper, almost invisible change is settling into minds. It is here, in this improvised tropical capital, that Brazil begins to discover itself. At first, the inhabitants of Rio observed the court with respect, fear, or indifference. They saw it as a strange spectacle, a procession of refined Europeans lost under the tropical sun. But over the months, curiosity turned to observation, then to reflection. The local elites, previously subject to Lisbon, realized that now the king lives among them. Their words, their advice, their ambitions weigh on state decisions. And that changes everything. In the newly opened salons of Rio, men discuss in hushed tones, by candlelight. They talk of politics, economics, philosophy. They cite French authors, English reformers, Enlightenment thinkers. The word independence is still only a murmur, but it exists already, discreet, suspended in the nocturnal heat. The newspapers authorized by João VI spread new ideas: progress, autonomy, nation, liberty. And in the shadows, the feeling of belonging to a single Brazilian people begins to germinate. Roads open, ports come alive, exchanges multiply. Brazil discovers its own immensity. Travelers recount tales of the north, the mountains of Minas Gerais, the rivers of the Amazon. The unity of this vast and diverse land appears for the first time. The words Brazil and Brazilians take on a new meaning. They no longer merely designate a colony and its inhabitants, but a community of destiny. In the cities, talk is of prosperity. Merchants grow rich, plantations expand, local families rise in influence. Many see this era of stability as a blessing, but others sense the imbalance. Portuguese privileges, the domination of European officials, taxes, confiscations, all this stirs deep resentment. Beneath the gilded facade of the court, discontent simmers. In the countryside, slaves toil relentlessly. Their songs rise at night, blending pain and memory. Brazil, despite its transformations, remains an empire built on servitude. And yet, even in the plantations, an echo of change is felt. The new institutions, economic reforms, and opening to the world bring with them dangerous ideas. The free man, the citizen, the homeland. Missionaries speak of justice. Travelers describe other societies where liberty exists. The children of colonists study in the royal schools opened by João VI. They learn to read European philosophers, to debate, to dream. And in their notebooks, the word Brazil becomes more than a place name. It becomes an ideal. At the palace, King João VI may not realize how much what he has created is already slipping from his grasp. He wanted a pacified, loyal, orderly empire. He founded a capital and modernized the country. But in bringing the light of Europe, he also awakened the shadows of doubt. For those who learn to think always end up wanting to decide. Young officers, jurists, Brazilian writers begin to recognize each other. They distinguish themselves from the newly arrived Portuguese. They speak differently, think differently, dream of a future without dependence. The first patriotic circles form, often under the guise of literary clubs or scientific associations. The idea of a free Brazil takes root, slowly, secretly, but irrevocably. And then there is nature. It too plays a role in this awakening. The mountains, rivers, forests, beaches, everything here seems immense, untamed, eternal. Europe seems small, distant, fragile in comparison. This vibrant territory gives its inhabitants a sense of power and singularity. Poets describe the forest as a symbol of a wild and free national soul. Painters, musicians, writers draw inspiration from the tropical landscape to create a distinctly Brazilian aesthetic. And little by little, the country's beauty becomes a mirror of its nascent liberty. But this awakening is not without fear. Many dread reprisals from Lisbon. Others fear the kingdom's unity might fracture. João VI, lucid, senses the growing tension. He multiplies titles, privileges, rewards, hoping to maintain the loyalty of local elites. But the murmurs do not fade. In taverns, squares, salons, one phrase is repeated: "If the king lives here, why should we obey Lisbon?" In 1815, a symbolic gesture crystallizes this change. Under pressure from circumstances and English influence, João VI elevates Brazil to the status of United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves. For the first time, Brazil is no longer legally a colony, but an equal part of the kingdom. This decision, meant to preserve unity, has the opposite effect. It convinces Brazilians they can be equals to the Portuguese, or even surpass them. That day, bells ring in Rio. Cannons thunder over the bay. The inhabitants celebrate this elevation to kingdom status. But in their hearts, something greater takes shape, the premonition of imminent independence. In the evening, as the heat subsides and the fires slowly die out on the hills, Rio falls asleep under a golden veil. The palm trees sway, the sea murmurs, the stars reflect in the bay, and in this deceptive calm, a breath sweeps through the city, a breath no decree can contain. It is that of a people beginning to recognize itself, to love itself, to desire itself. A people that no longer sees itself merely as subjects of a king, but as the guardians of a vast, free, and soon sovereign land. Chapter 2. The King's Return and the Shadow of Lisbon. Part 1. The Departure of João VI. Rio de Janeiro, 1821. 13 years have passed since the crossing of the ocean. The court has acclimated. The streets hum with carriages, priests, soldiers. The palace gleams under the tropical sun. For the inhabitants of Rio, the king's presence is no longer extraordinary. João VI has become part of the scenery, a symbol of unexpected stability. But far away, across the Atlantic, the world is stirring. In Portugal, the liberal revolution of 1820 has erupted in Porto. The Cortes, the newly formed Constitutional Assembly, seek to reshape the monarchy and issue a curt demand. The king must return. Messengers cross the sea, bearing dispatches sealed with wax. The phrases are polite, the formulas cautious, but the order is clear. Restore Lisbon as the kingdom's center and place Brazil under the direct authority of the Cortes. In the corridors of São Cristóvão Palace, the king reads the letters in silence. Around him, ministers debate. Some plead, "Majesty, staying here means provoking war." Others retort, "Leaving means abandoning Brazil and everything we have built." The old sovereign is pious, cautious, and weary. He senses the approaching storm. If he refuses to return, Lisbon will declare him a usurper. If he obeys, he leaves behind a vast, autonomous, vibrant kingdom that will never revert to colonial status. Caught between duty and fear, João VI chooses the lesser danger. He will return. But before leaving, he makes a crucial decision: to leave his son, Pedro de Bragança, the young and spirited prince beloved by the people, as regent of Brazil. Thus, he thinks, the dynasty will remain present, and perhaps the storm will subside. Rumors spread through the city. In the taverns, news from Lisbon is discussed. The Cortes want to abolish the institutions created in Rio, close the ministries, withdraw local troops. Some cry betrayal. They want to reduce us to a colony. Others, more legalistic, defend the Portuguese Constitution, hoping the promised liberties will outweigh a court frozen in the past. But in the salons of Brazilian families, the tone is graver. Since the king's arrival, society has changed. Newspapers exist, universities are developing, Brazilian officers command garrisons. The country knows how to govern. And the idea that a distant parliament could dissolve everything stirs a quiet anger. At the palace, João VI prepares his departure slowly. Crates pile up. Archives, books, liturgical objects, memories of a tropical reign. Many refuse to follow the king. They now feel at home in Brazil. The corridors echo with discreet farewells. In the evening, Pedro joins his father in the grand salon. No one knows their exact words. There is talk of paternal advice, promises, blessings. A phrase, famous in memory, is imagined. Pedro, if Brazil separates, place yourself at its head before someone else does. Truth or legend? It matters little. The essence is clear. The king departs, but the succession of destiny is entrusted to his son. On April 25, 1821, the bells ring in Rio. The docks are crowded. The king appears, dressed in black, his face solemn. He speaks of unity, fidelity, the promise of return. The words are sincere, but behind the solemnity floats a sense of farewell. The people remain silent. The sails rise slowly, the cannons salute, and the fleet moves away in the morning light. On the hills, the inhabitants watch the sea close over the horizon. A murmur spreads. The king has left. Then another phrase, heavier with meaning. Brazil remains. In the weeks that follow, the royal void fills with a new movement. Pedro, now Prince Regent, takes the helm of the government. He receives envoys from the provinces, signs decrees, listens to the advice of José Bonifácio de Andrada e Silva, a lucid scholar and patriot. The latter understands the gravity of the moment. Lisbon will demand total obedience, but Brazil, now accustomed to governing, will refuse to bend. So Bonifácio advises the regent to buy time, rely on the army, speak to the people, and prepare for a possible break. Pedro hesitates. He is still loyal to his father in Portugal, but each letter from Europe wounds him. The Cortes order him to disband local troops, return immediately to Lisbon, reduce Brazil to silence. The orders become threats, and each word sent from across the Atlantic pushes the young regent further from the metropolis. In Rio, the atmosphere grows tense. Cafes buzz with debates, pamphlets circulate, speaking of liberty and national dignity. Brazilian officers swear loyalty to one another. Notables from the provinces send messages to Pedro, "Stay here, govern." The people, simple but passionate, begin to chant his name in the streets. In Lisbon, they still believe Brazil will obey. But in the heat of tropical nights, the real power has shifted shores. The king, in departing, left behind not a void, but a beaten heart, that of a country beginning to feel master of itself. When the king's fleet vanishes over the horizon, no one yet knows that this crossing will mark a point of no return. Lisbon thinks it will reclaim its empire. Brazil, meanwhile, discovers it can stand upright without a tutor. In the illuminated palace of São Cristóvão, Pedro gazes at the Guanabara Bay and murmurs to himself, "If I must choose between Portugal and Brazil, I will choose Brazil." It is still an unspoken thought, but history already holds its breath. For at that moment, without proclamation, without a flag, Brazil's destiny has reversed. Part 2. The Cortes seek to subdue Brazil. The year 1821 drags on in the sultry heat of Rio. King João VI has left the city months ago, and already the echo from Lisbon returns, sharper than ever. The Cortes, established in revolutionary fervor, send order after order, decree after decree, seeking to regain control of this kingdom deemed too rich, too vast, too independent for their liking. Each official dispatch is a call to order. Dissolve the Ministry of War, abolish the tribunals created in Rio, dismiss the local troops. The Prince Regent must return to Portugal immediately. The words are cold, administrative, but their tone carries the sting of humiliation. For Brazilians, this is no longer governance. It is contempt. In Rio, Pedro reads these letters in silence. Around him, his advisors watch his face harden as he scans the lines. He has sworn loyalty to his father in Portugal, but what he reads now is no longer a dialogue. It is a demand for submission. The Cortes want to recall him, strip him of his regency, dismantle everything Brazil has built since the court's arrival. José Bonifácio, his minister and mentor, warns him, "If your highness obeys, we lose everything. If you stay, we risk rupture. But it is better to die standing than to live on our knees." Pedro nods without responding. He is young, impulsive, but he feels the weight of history on his shoulders. Every decision now could tip the balance, peace or war, unity or separation. The orders from Europe strike the country like a rain of iron. In Bahia, Pernambuco, São Paulo, Portuguese garrisons believe they are authorized to impose their law. Clashes erupt between Brazil-born troops and soldiers from Lisbon. In the ports, Portuguese ships block trade routes, search cargoes, insult local officers. Everywhere, resentment grows. The Brazilians do not understand. For over a decade, they have welcomed the king, protected the crown, transformed their country into an imperial capital. And now they are sent the image of a docile colony, incapable of governing itself. Brazilian newspapers retort, "Lisbon wants to plunge us back into the darkness from which we have just emerged." The Cortes, confident in their legitimacy, do not relent. They fear English influence in Brazil, dread the loss of colonial revenues, and fear the example of other Latin American independences. Their remedy for all this, centralization. They want a strong Portugal, a subordinate Brazil. But in seeking to dominate, they awaken the nationalism they fear. Pedro receives a final order: return immediately to Europe to swear allegiance to the Constitution. It is no longer a request. It is an ultimatum. If he obeys, he will become a secondary prince, watched, erased. If he refuses, he will betray the metropolis, and already, in the streets of Rio, voices rise. "Don't leave, Pedro! Stay with us!" Brazilian notables begin to unite around him. The provinces send petitions imploring the regent to defy the Cortes. Officers pledge their support. Merchants offer funds for the army. Newspapers glorify him. Each word from Lisbon becomes another step toward separation. The wisest, like Bonifácio, still try to temporize. They remind that breaking with the metropolis would be perilous. Brazil is vast, its provinces often rivals, and the Portuguese army remains powerful. But the humiliations accumulate. Lisbon demands that Portuguese troops be sent back to Rio to restore order. This time, patience frays. In September 1821, unrest shakes the capital. Rumors circulate. The Cortes are sending soldiers by sea to forcibly retrieve Pedro. Crowds form in front of São Cristóvão Palace. Men, women, freed slaves, soldiers, merchants, all shout with one voice, "Fique, Dom Pedro, stay here." It is an unprecedented moment. The people, who until then endured history, now invite themselves into it. The cries rise like a tide in the evening heat. The Portuguese soldiers stationed in the city hesitate to intervene. Pedro steps out onto the balcony. He looks at this crowd, arms raised, faces burning with hope. He realizes then that he no longer represents only the monarchy, but Brazil itself. That night, he does not sleep. He speaks at length with Leopoldina, his wife, intelligent, calm, clear-eyed. She tells him softly, "You were born a prince, but here you can become a king, not of a throne, but of a people." Pedro remained silent. In his heart, loyalty and liberty clash. He loves his father, but he also loves this land, these faces, this hybrid language, this promise of a future. In the morning, he will make a decision that will forever change Brazil's history. But before the grand gesture comes the final message. On January 8, 1822, the Cortes send a definitive letter. They order Pedro to return immediately to Portugal, under penalty of being considered a rebel. This time, the tone is unambiguous, but the response will not be long in coming. The next day, January 9th, Pedro appears before the gathered crowd. Thousands await him, anxious, breathless. He brandishes the letter from Lisbon, tears it apart, and declares in a strong voice, "If it is for the good of all and the general happiness of the nation, I am ready. I will stay." The cries erupt, hats fly, bells ring across the bay. That day, Rio vibrates with a new energy. The Portuguese see it as an affront, but for Brazilians, it is a vow. A prince has chosen his side. History will call it the Dia do Fico, the day he stayed. This simple but solemn phrase spreads like lightning through the provinces. In taverns, on roads and ports, it is repeated with pride. Dom Pedro ficou. Brazil has found its voice. From now on, the regent is no longer merely the king's representative. He is the guardian of the people. Lisbon does not yet know it, but the united monarchy has split in two. An entire Atlantic now separates not only lands, but two destinies. And in the middle, a 23-year-old man standing on a balcony has sealed the future of an empire. Part 3. Pedro refuses to obey. Rio de Janeiro, January-May, 1822. The balcony of the Dia do Fico has fallen silent, but the echo of the phrase still circulates in the alleys. I will stay. The Cortes in Lisbon have not relented. They send further injunctions, even harsher. Brazil, however, will no longer bow. Between the two shores, the Atlantic is no longer a bridge. It is a line of fracture. At São Cristóvão Palace, José Bonifácio de Andrada y Silva spreads out maps, reports, newspapers. His finger traces the coasts. Bahia, a hotspot where Portuguese troops entrench. Pernambuco, volatile, restless. São Paulo, proud and resolute. Minas, a reservoir of men and wealth. Bonifácio speaks in a calm, almost professorial voice. Highness, obeying Lisbon would be to deny yourself. Disobeying without organizing would be to doom yourself. You must reign. Reign here. Reign now. Pedro nods, jaws clenched. He has stayed. Now he must act. The word treason hangs in the air, but not where expected. Betray whom? Betray what? When the metropolis denies Brazil's political existence, history suddenly boils down to simple gestures. Appoint, sign, raise, command. Each paper becomes a barricade. The first act is administrative and decisive. In January, Bonifácio takes the reins of a reorganized ministry. Finances are put in order, decisions centralized, provinces given a voice in Rio through advisory councils, to forge loyalties, calm jealousies, and give the capital the stature of a government. The printers work tirelessly. Patriotic leaflets appear, manifestos circulate, harsh words against the Cortes are printed in black ink. Dignity, nation, honor. Taverns read them aloud. Soldiers memorize them. The Brazilian army does not truly exist. It must be born. Militias are reorganized. Local officers promise pay and promotions. Green and yellow cockades distributed. Loyalty sworn to the regent. Portuguese officers hesitate. Lisbon sent them here, but Pedro holds the keys to barracks, salaries, promotions. The gravity of reality cuts through abstract loyalties. Orders from Lisbon keep arriving, scathing. Disband local troops, repatriate regiments, dismantle Rio's ministries. Pedro no longer forwards them. He has a formula stamped on inconvenient edicts. Cumpra-se com a minha real aprovação. Execute with my royal approval. A dry way of saying nothing applies without me. It is a clerical detail. It is a paper revolution. In the provinces, the news spreads faster than a rider. In Rio, the regent filters Portuguese law. Notables understand they can lean on him. They write impassioned letters. They offer to raise battalions, provide supplies, lend money. Everywhere, compromises turn into commitments. Bahia remains a dark spot on the map. There, the Portuguese commander Madeira de Melo holds the garrison, backed by the Cortes authority. The streets of Salvador fill with whistles, thrown stones, skirmishes. Women hide cartridges under their shawls. Students mount guard posts. Fishermen block Portuguese boats. The first deaths fall, stark, incomprehensible, cold. The revolution ceases to be a word. It tastes of gunpowder. Pedro summons his officers. Open battle cannot, not yet, be waged, but they can strangle, cut off routes, prevent landings, win hearts. In Rio, a young officer adjusts his tunic after an audience. In São Paulo, riders take to the roads, carrying sealed orders. In Minas, heavy coffers of silver coins are opened. Political decision becomes logistical. Feed, clothe, arm, reassure. In the dim light of an office, Maria Leopoldina writes. She corresponds with Vienna, British diplomats, provincial elites. Her pen is gentle and unyielding. She speaks of just cause, stability, respect. To potential allies, she promises a moderate constitutional monarchy. To the hesitant, she guarantees business continuity. She understands what Pedro, chivalrous, feels. Brazil must not only break away, it must persuade. Meanwhile, Bonifácio shapes the invisible architecture. He manages the press, protects patriotic printers, gives breathing room to reasonable opponents, enough to avoid suffocation, not enough to weaken the march. He speaks to Pedro like a father to an overly ardent captain. Anger is a useful fire if it heats the forge. It destroys the workshop if left unchecked. The regent nods. They choose battles, measure gestures. March 1822 arrives. Lisbon, exasperated, demands the regent's immediate recall and the dispatch of Brazilian recruited expeditionary corps to Europe. It is absurdity pushed to the extreme. Disarm your defense and abandon your post. This time, Pedro responds bluntly, he will not obey. He summons municipal bodies, consults provincial deputations, multiplies public audiences where petitions pile up. Fique, Dom Pedro. Stay. On May 13, 1822, his birthday, the city erupts in acclamations. Pedro is proclaimed Defensor Perpetuo do Brasil, perpetual defender of Brazil. A flamboyant title, certainly, but also a moral contract. The people, notables, and army invest him with a mission: protect. Protect against Lisbon, against division, against fear. The young man who loved horses and parades suddenly becomes the pillar of a nation. Symbols are needed. Revolutions feed on colors and sounds. Green and gold cockades shine on hats. Patriotic songs speak of homeland and hope. New banners are raised, but institutions are needed above all. A streamlined council of state around the regent, commissioners sent to provinces to coordinate efforts, courts judging in his name, military commands receiving orders only from Rio. To govern is here and now. Each step leads to another. They begin controlling mail from Lisbon, withholding what fuels unrest, responding with firm and measured proclamations. In a famous text, Pedro demands that the Cortes laws apply in Brazil only with his approval. Legally bold, politically a point of no return. Jurists smile wryly. Beneath ornate formulas, it is the embryo of sovereignty. The tension is such that a spark could ignite everything. That spark sometimes has the name of a street, a poorly aimed blow, a boat boarded too roughly. In Bahia, skirmishes turn into sieges. In Pernambuco, patriotic clubs mount nightly guards. In São Paulo, light cavalry units form, swearing with raised hands, "For Brazil to the end." Priests bless flags, women sew, children sing. Politics descends from balconies into our homes. In his study, Pedro sometimes measures the abyss. He thinks of his father, the dynasty, that Portugal of stone and mist. Loyalty has not vanished. It has shifted. He is faithful to what the monarchy was meant to guarantee: the protection of peoples, the justice of laws, the dignity of nations. In Lisbon, these words sound like defiance. In Rio, they resonate as a foundation. One stormy evening, thunder rolls over the bay. Bonifácio, soaked, arrives with more dispatches. Pedro reads, shakes his head, and signs a decree strengthening military command in the regent's name. "Let it be published," the word snaps. In the print shop, the type tightens, the ink shines. By morning, the city will discover another step in organized disobedience. For that is what this is, not defiance for defiance's sake, but building through refusal, refusing orders that demean, building forces that protect. Brazil has not yet proclaimed its independence, yet through its actions, it already lives it, judging, raising, paying, publishing, negotiating. The state is there, standing, and Lisbon can no longer ignore it. As the dry season approaches, Rio's skies turn a sharp blue. From the palace terrace, Pedro watches white sails glide across the bay. He thinks of the road to São Paulo, the provinces awaiting him, the messages flooding in. Soon, he will leave the capital to take the country's pulse far from the salons. There, on the dusty red roads, something awaits him: a letter, a sealed dossier, a cry that will become famous. But for now, the essential is secured. Pedro has refused to obey. He did so not out of caprice, but as a founder. He is no longer a prince temporizing. He is a leader assuming his role. And in the still distant rumble of history, a phrase takes shape, ready to burst forth: independence or death. Chapter 3. The Fire of Patriotism. Part 1. The Council of José Bonifácio. The sun rises over Rio de Janeiro. The year 1822 moves slowly forward, but something irreversible hangs in the air. The Dia do Fico has made Pedro the symbol of hope. But O symbol, without direction, is merely a flickering flame. It is then that a man whose wisdom will give form to this fervor steps forward, José Bonifácio de Andrada e Silva. He is a singular figure, almost anachronistic. Born in Sao Paulo, educated in Coimbra, a traveler across Europe, naturalist, scholar, patriot, he has seen and studied it all: chemistry, mineralogy, politics, the Enlightenment. In Lisbon, he frequented academies and enlightened salons. But it is here, in Brazil, that he finds the terrain where thought becomes action. Pedro, still young and spirited, noticed him in the early months of his government. Bonifácio, calm and methodical, speaks little, but thinks clearly. In the tumult of passions and flattery, he is a clear voice. When he joins the Council of State, murmurs fall silent. He is not noble, but he is listened to like an oracle. Under his influence, the Regency takes on a new stature. It is no longer just about resisting Lisbon, but about founding a nation. Bonifácio often repeats, "Liberty is not a cry, it is a construction. Without law, it destroys itself." His counsel follows with an engineer's precision: strengthen local administration, create economic ties between provinces, centralize military correspondence, develop the press to counter Portuguese propaganda. Each idea is conceived as a brick in the future state. In his study, cluttered with books and maps, he works tirelessly. Messengers come and go, carrying sealed documents. His nervous handwriting covers entire sheets. The texts he drafts are weapons: decrees, manifestos, letters, treaties. Through his words, he prepares Brazil to be more than a territory, a consciousness. Pedro listens, often in silence. The young regent, impulsive, loves action. Bonifácio, reflection. One wants to defend, the other to build. And little by little, the alliance between these two temperaments shapes the path to independence. They are sometimes compared to a general and his strategist, a fire and its embers. The two men write to each other daily. Bonifácio sends notes full of prudence and clarity. Avoid abrupt gestures. There is no need to announce what will impose itself naturally. Win the provinces before proclaiming anything. Independence does not need to be declared. It must be acknowledged. Pedro often smiles reading these lines. He, accustomed to frank emotions, discovers the power of political patience. But when he flares up, Bonifácio knows how to strike with a simple phrase: "He who commands a people cannot follow his heart without listening to his reason." And Pedro, despite his youth, learns to restrain himself. Under Bonifácio's guidance, Brazil equips itself with new structures. The Council of State becomes a true government. Emissaries are sent to provinces to rally local authorities to the Regency. Military leaders receive letters blending the rhetoric of loyalty with that of homeland. The king is far, but Brazil is here. In the streets, tension remains high. Portugal's supporters accuse Bonifácio of usurping power, manipulating Pedro. Some openly conspire, but the minister's supporters are numerous, and his intelligence inspires fear. He knows the most decisive battles are won before a single shot is fired. This patriotic scholar understands the country's complexity better than anyone. He knows a disunited Brazil would descend into civil war. He fears the bloody fate of neighboring Spanish colonies, fractured into rival republics. So he works to avoid chaos. He defends an original idea: a Brazilian constitutional monarchy, not a fervent republic nor an outdated absolutism, but a balance between liberty and stability. This pragmatic and profound vision captivates Pedro. It offers him a middle path, to be faithful both to his father and to his people. In this form, independence is no longer rebellion, but a mutation of the kingdom. Days pass, and the Brazilian press becomes the battlefield of ideas. Patriotic newspapers exalt Pedro and Bonifácio. Loyalist papers attack them. But the people increasingly side with the regent. His name is sung in the streets, green and gold colors are displayed. Sermons in churches speak of Providence choosing Brazil for a new mission. The momentum becomes collective. In taverns, discussions ignite. The most educated cite Montesquieu, Rousseau, Locke. The simpler folk speak of honor and dignity. All in their way contribute to the birth of a popular patriotism. One evening, in his study, Bonifácio writes a letter to Pedro. It is brief but pivotal. Sire, you have chosen to stay. Now, you must dare to lead. You cannot be half prince, half patriot. History does not tolerate half measures. Pedro keeps the letter close for a long time. It weighs more than a decree, more than an oath. It draws a clear line. Between Portugal and Brazil, a choice is now a necessity. In the months that follow, Bonifácio intensifies his efforts. He prepares social reforms, gradual abolition of the slave trade, encouragement of free immigration, development of public education. He wants Brazil to be born not only independent, but modern. He speaks of industry, science, progress. He dreams of an enlightened empire in the heart of the tropics. His adversaries mock him, calling him the philosopher. But Pedro calls him my old Brazilian, and that affection is his best armor. Under Rio's burning sky, politics becomes passion. Each morning, newspapers publish manifestos. Local assemblies send letters of support. Soldiers train on the beaches. Bonifácio, tireless, sees in this tumult the sign of a renaissance. The fire burns, yes, but it illuminates. Brazil is learning to see itself, and that, in essence, is what he has achieved, giving the country a vision of itself. Under his guidance, independence is no longer an abstract idea, but a road paved with institutions, laws, and dreams. Pedro, guided by this man of science and faith, ceases to be a mere heir. He becomes a leader, a prince forged by conviction and the storm. In the silence of his evenings, Bonifácio gazes at the bay, its lights dancing on the water. He knows the road ahead is still long, that Lisbon will not yield. But he smiles, for in this vast country, a fire has been lit, the fire of patriotism, and nothing now can extinguish it. Part 2. The role of Maria Leopoldina. She was not born for tumult. Maria Leopoldina of Austria, Archduchess of the House of Habsburg, daughter of Emperor Francis III, was raised in the quiet palaces of Vienna, surrounded by music, painting, and moral rigor. Her life was meant to be that of a learned and pious princess, not a tropical queen at the heart of a revolution. And yet, it is in the humidity of Rio, amid intrigues and popular fervor, that this shy woman would become the political soul of Brazilian independence. When she arrives in Rio in 1817 to marry Dom Pedro de Bragança, she discovers a world far removed from her native Europe. The colors, the heat, the scents, the music, everything overwhelms her. The journey was long, the storms harsh, but she keeps smiling. She knows her marriage is not one of love, but of state, an alliance between the Portuguese crown and the House of Austria, consolidated to balance British influence. Yet, over the months, she grows fond of Pedro. She sees in him sincerity, passion, the fire of a man still rough but deeply human. Maria Leopoldina is not a frivolous queen. She speaks 5 languages, reads philosophers, and takes an interest in natural sciences. She corresponds with Alexander von Humboldt, the great explorer, and supports Brazilian naturalists. She studies the local flora, collects shells, stones, insects. But behind this scholarly curiosity lies a remarkably lucid political mind. She observes, listens, understands. She knows that this vast, young, vibrant country will not long tolerate the chains of a distant power. So, while Pedro wrestles with his tempers and contradictions, she thinks long-term. She becomes his most intimate advisor, his most faithful confidant. Witnesses of the time recount their evenings in San Cristóbal Palace. Pedro, nervous, paces back and forth, reading Lisbon's letters aloud. He flares up, swears, strikes the table with his fist. Leopoldina, seated calmly, waits for him to fall silent, then speaks in a soft but firm voice. You cannot be half king and half son. If you wish to govern, you must cease to obey. This is not the rebellion of a wife. It is the reason of a queen. She knows Pedro's loyalty to his father, King João VI, Gus, is sincere. But she also sees that Lisbon no longer wants a strong Brazil. So she encourages him not to revolt, but to reveal himself. Her influence is subtle. She does not write decrees, but inspires the words they contain. She does not command troops, but calms their leaders. She discreetly receives English and Austrian diplomats, reassuring some, informing others. She knows independence will only have meaning if it avoids unnecessary bloodshed. Thus, she watches every gesture, every phrase, every encounter. Under her gentle hand, diplomacy becomes a weapon as powerful as cannons. The women of the people respect her. They see her as a benevolent foreigner, pious and attentive to the humblest. She visits convents, orphanages, supports artists and schools. In a world of men and swords, she embodies stability, kindness, the moral legitimacy of power. The soldiers nickname her a Mãe do Brasil, the mother of Brazil. This title she never claimed, but it sums up what she represents: the tenderness of a still childlike country, the wisdom of a nation in gestation. As months pass, tensions rise. Lisbon multiplies provocations. Pedro receives new letters from the Cortes, ever more contemptuous. He sometimes doubts, weary, worried. Then Leopoldina listens, reassures. She reminds him that his mission is no longer merely dynastic, but historic. She speaks of the people waiting, the provinces supporting him, Bonifácio's trust. She pushes him to surpass himself, and often, after these conversations, Pedro steps into Rio's warm night with renewed conviction in his gaze. But Leopoldina is not just a wife and confidant. She is a strategist. She understands that the fight for independence is not only military but narrative. Lisbon paints Pedro as an ungrateful rebel. She, in contrast, makes him an enlightened liberator. She organizes ceremonies, encourages artists, to depict the regent heroically, asks priests to preach peace and divine justice in Brazil's favor. She turns politics into myth and myth into movement. Through her, Pedro's cause becomes that of the people. In the spring of 1822, as tension mounts across the country, Leopoldina writes a letter to her father, the Emperor of Austria. My husband and I walk through a time of storm. Portugal seeks to reduce this kingdom to servitude, but here I see men rising, women praying, a people hoping. If heaven wills it, I will witness the birth of a great empire, not of war, but of dignity. These simple, sincere words reveal her full foresight. She knows history is not decided on thrones, but in the will of peoples. Over the months, Leopoldina becomes the invisible intermediary between patriots and the regent. Bonifácio consults her. Provincial deputies write to her. When Pedro travels across the country, she manages the government. Her signature on decrees already carries a scent of independence. And no one, neither in Rio nor Lisbon, yet imagines that this gentle young woman with her reserved smile holds the balance of an empire in her hands. She knows the inevitable approaches. Each dispatch from Europe announces the coming rupture, but she does not tremble. In the solitude of the palace, she prays, writes, advises, with the quiet faith of those who understand before others. She seeks no glory. She simply wants Brazil to be born without tearing itself apart. And when the moment comes, a few months later, on the banks of the Ipiranga River, it will be her pen, even more than Pedro's sword, that will have prepared that cry, independence or death. Maria Leopoldina never brandished a sword, but her courage, silent and steadfast, was sharper than steel. She gave Pedro vision, the people confidence, and Brazil its first maternal figure. Where so many men sought to lead, she chose to inspire. And in that inspiration lies one of history's deepest truths. Nations are born not only in battles, but in the hearts of women who understand them. Part 3. The Provinces Rise. The year 1822 advances toward its midpoint, and across Brazil's vast territory, drums resound. From the north to the southern mountains, Pedro's name circulates like a word of hope, carried by the wind, by horses, by coastal ships. Letters, pamphlets, patriotic songs spread faster than Lisbon's orders. The Dia do Fico was the spark. Now, it is the blaze. In Bahia, tension is fiercest. The Portuguese soldiers of Madeira de Melo refuse to recognize the regent's authority. In Salvador's streets, inhabitants descend en masse, armed with sticks, hunting rifles, stones. Women encourage from windows, throwing tiles, bottles, curses. Green and gold flags wave from balconies. Clashes erupt, violent, chaotic, mixing civilians and soldiers. Loyalist troops bombard the city from the heights, but Brazilian militias hold firm. Resistance organizes, a local command, improvised arms depots, messengers heading to Rio for aid. Pedro, receiving the news, rises sharply. If Bahia falls, they will take the heart of Brazil. Bonifácio responds gravely. Then Bahia must become the symbol of what we are ready to defend. In Pernambuco, the memory of earlier liberal revolts still simmers. This northeastern province, marked by movements at the century's start, rises again. Local assemblies proclaim loyalty to Pedro, and rejection of Lisbon. Regional newspapers headline in bold letters, "Long live free Brazil! Long live Dom Pedro!" Orators harangue crowds in public squares. Artisans abandon their workshops to form militias. Priests bless banners in the colors of the nascent Brazil. In the countryside, news spreads from village to village by travelers, mules, freed slaves. Everywhere the same phrase is repeated, "We will no longer be a colony." It is simple, almost naive, but it is the cry of a people recognizing itself as such for the first time. In São Paulo, fervor takes a different form, more political, more organized. The proud local elites send delegates to the palace. They offer to support the regency, but demand guarantees, representation, autonomy, open trade routes. Pedro, advised by Bonifácio and Leopoldina, receives them with a mix of caution and firmness. He understands that the country's unity depends on his ability to listen without submitting. The Paulistas soon adopt him as their champion. They promise funds, men, and above all, their loyalty. This support changes everything. The economic and political center of the South aligns with the regent. Now, the North resists, the South organizes, and the country's heart beats for independence. Lisbon has no solid foothold left, only isolated garrisons, locked ports, and an arrogance grown sterile. In the plains of Minas Gerais, miners and landowners recall the Inconfidencia Mineira, the failed independence attempt 30 years earlier. The names of Tiradentes and his companions return in conversations, whispered like prayers. The patriots of that time were hanged or exiled, but their ideas revive under a new flag, that of Brazil. Commemorative masses turn into political rallies. The mountains become refuges for Brazilian troops, observation points, rallying grounds. Minas, with its goldsmiths and soldiers, becomes the moral treasure of the cause. In Rio de Janeiro, the capital, everything boils. Markets brim with rumors. Soldiers wear green and gold cockades on their uniforms. Students recite patriotic poems. Nocturnal printers distribute tracts signed Friends of Liberty. Residents paint stars on doors, a secret symbol of support for the regent. Even in the poor quarters, a new pride of belonging to a nation in the making is felt. Brazil, once a mosaic of provinces, begins to speak a single language of the heart. But this effervescence worries. Lisbon is not deaf. New troops are announced. Rumors speak of a fleet in preparation, an imminent landing to restore order. Bonifácio understands that the time for dialogue is over. He advises Pedro to strengthen the army, send reinforcements to the north, fortify the ports, and above all, to go himself, to meet the country, to show that Brazil has a face, a voice, a leader. On August 14, 1822, Pedro leaves Rio on horseback for São Paulo. His entourage advances slowly on dusty roads, acclaimed by the villages past. Inhabitants wait by the roadsides, bearing palm branches and improvised flags. They offer bread, flowers, water, shouting, "Long live Dom Pedro! Long live Brazil!" The young regent discovers the strength of this invisible bond uniting him to an entire people. It is no longer imposed loyalty. It is freely given allegiance. Meanwhile, in Rio, Leopoldina governs in his absence. She signs decrees, receives envoys, writes to the provinces. She maintains calm, but deep down, she senses something approaching, a jolt an irrevocable event. She knows Pedro will sooner or later have to break openly with Lisbon, and she prepares in the shadows to support him unwaveringly. Across the country, priests, soldiers, merchants, freed slaves, students, all in one way or another, join this surge toward independence. Religious processions become patriotic demonstrations. Church bells ring as much for Mass as for liberty. Children sing improvised hymns. Veterans of colonial wars take up arms again, this time to defend their own land. The fervor is such that it permeates the air, a constant vibration, a breath of anticipation. Brazil has not yet declared its independence, but it already behaves as a free country. The provinces, once separated by distance, culture, interest, discover a shared destiny. Pedro's letters pass from hand to hand, copied, translated, read aloud in churches and markets. His words speak of unity, peace, dignity, and each reading elicits applause, tears, oaths. What is at play here, beyond politics, is a revolution of identity. For the first time, Brazil is not just a possession, but an idea carried not by a handful of scholars, but by an entire people. A simple, immense, irreversible idea. We are Brazil. And so, as Pedro ventures deeper into the country, history accelerates. The red dirt roads become the arteries of a nascent nation. Each village passed reignites the fire. The cries, songs, bells, all herald the imminence of a turning point. Lisbon, far away, does not yet understand. Its empire is crumbling not in war, but in fervor. It is not an army advancing, but a people rising. Chapter 4. The Cry of Ipiranga. Part 1. The Portuguese Ultimatums. Early September 1822. The sun beats down hard on the road to São Paulo. Dom Pedro rides at the head of a small entourage, followed by a reduced escort. The sabers clink to the rhythm of the hooves. Around him, the countryside stretches out, burning and silent. He does not yet know it, but in a few days, this silence will be shattered forever. For months, Lisbon has been multiplying its threats. The Portuguese Cortes, outraged by the regent's disobedience, demand that he return to Portugal immediately. They call him a rebel, a usurper, a traitor to the crown. They want to restore by force what diplomacy has lost. Fleets are being prepared, troops are embarking, and the last garrisons loyal to the metropolis still hold Bahia, Maranhão, and Grão-Pará. But Lisbon does not understand. Brazil no longer obeys. In Rio, tension is at its peak. Maria Leopoldina, remaining in the capital to govern during her husband's journey, receives a new dispatch from Portugal. It is the ultimatum everyone feared. The Prince Regent must return immediately. Refusal to obey will be considered an act of rebellion against the Portuguese nation. She reads the letter several times, her hands trembling. Around her, the Council of State has convened urgently. José Bonifácio, his face stern, immediately grasps the significance of this text. Lisbon will no longer negotiate. From now on, to obey is to surrender. On September 2, 1822, Leopoldina presides over the council in her husband's place, an unprecedented event in the history of the Portuguese monarchy. The ministers debate at length. Some, still cautious, hope for a final compromise. but Bonifácio cuts through. Patience would now be a betrayal. Portugal wants our submission, not our loyalty. The time has come to break. Silence falls over the room. Everyone understands that these words seal the fate of an empire. Leopoldina takes up her pen. In her fine handwriting, she signs a decree authorizing Pedro to proclaim Brazil's independence whenever he deems it necessary. It is an immense political act, almost invisible in its form, but gigantic in its consequence. That day, before the cry of Ipiranga, Brazil's independence was decided by a woman. Meanwhile, on the dusty roads of the interior, Pedro continues his tour. He passes from village to village, receiving tributes from local militias, listening to the people's grievances. Everywhere, the same words: liberty, dignity, independence. The people no longer await an order from Lisbon, but a sign from him. On the morning of September 7th, he stops near the Ipiranga River in the outskirts of São Paulo. The sun is high, the heat overwhelming. He dismounts to rest in the shade of a fig tree. It is there that a breathless rider arrives, covered in dust. Paulo Bragaro, a courier sent from Rio. He brings a satchel full of letters and newspapers, including one from Leopoldina. Pedro withdraws and begins to read. The first letter is from his wife. My beloved, the Cortes have declared us enemies. Their tone is no longer that of a brotherly kingdom, but of a conqueror. We can no longer wait. The people want you. Brazil claims you. Act as a leader, not a subject. May God protect you. Leopoldina. The second letter is from José Bonifácio. Sire, the time for hesitation is over. Portugal treats us as rebels. The salvation of the Brazilian kingdom depends on your courage. Independence is inevitable. Proclaim it before they proclaim it against us. Pedro lowers his head. The hot wind stirs the dust on the road. His face is closed, but his eyes shine. He understands. The choice he has been avoiding for months has arrived. It is no longer a question of loyalty. It is a question of survival. He rereads Leopoldina's letter one last time. She speaks of faith, of the future, of the people. He thinks of her gentleness, her quiet strength. He thinks of his father, far away in Lisbon, whom he still loves despite everything. And he thinks of this vast, burning, untamed country that has adopted him. His heart wavers one last time. Then he murmurs, "It is done. They leave us no choice." He tears up the letter from the Cortes, the one ordering him to return, and casts it into the dust. His companions around him sense the moment approaching. An almost religious silence settles. Pedro stands tall. He mounts his horse, Bayo, draws his sword, raises it to the sky, and with a resounding voice he cries, "Independencia o mort!" Independence or death. The soldiers, officers, and servants shout with him. The horses rear, the flags unfurl, the sabers gleam under the sun. The cry echoes through the valley, reverberates over the hills, and fades into the forest. The Ipiranga River, a silent witness, keeps its echo for eternity. This fleeting, brief moment becomes the founding act of a nation. Without battle, without treaty, without ceremony, a cry is enough to give birth to an empire. Brazil has just separated from Portugal, not in hatred, but in necessity. It is a birth, not a vengeance. The escort cheers, acclaims, weeps. Pedro, his eyes moist, looks to the sky. He thinks of his father, of Leopoldina, of Bonifácio, of all those who guided him here. He knows nothing will be simple. Portugal will not recognize this independence overnight. There will be battles, negotiations, perhaps betrayals. But in his heart, a strange peace settles, that of a fulfilled inevitability. The world has just changed. The entourage resumes its journey, sabers raised, flags waving in the wind. In the surrounding villages, the news spreads like a wave. People shout, pray, dance. The bells ring in São Paulo, then in Rio, then in Bahia. Brazil has just proclaimed itself free, and in this cry, in this breath, an entire people has recognized itself. A few days later, Pedro writes to Leopoldina, "My love, destiny has been fulfilled. I no longer have any homeland but that of this people. I have spoken the words you awaited. May God give us the strength to be worthy of what we have just created." She reads his letter, tears in her eyes. She knows the storm is not over, but the hardest part is done. The history of Brazil has just entered its own light. And so, on a lost road between dust and sun, without official witnesses or protocol, a 23-year-old man has transformed a colony into an empire. His cry, "Independencia ou morte," is not a word of war, but an act of love, that of a prince who chose his people. The Atlantic that day did not roar, but somewhere in the silence of the seas, a chain was broken. Part 2, The Scene of Ipiranga, September 7, 1822. The heat of the São Paulo plateau weighs on the red, cracked earth. The wind is scarce, the sky immense. A narrow river snakes through the vegetation, the Ipiranga. Nothing in this tranquil landscape suggests it will become the sanctuary of a national birth. The scene unfolds a few kilometers from the city. Dom Pedro, in travel attire, boots covered in dust, advances to the riverbank. Around him, a handful of men. Francisco Gomes de Silva, his faithful secretary nicknamed Chalasa, a few officers, a few guards, and the courier who just brought Leopoldina's letter. The horses snort, weary. The men fall silent, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Pedro rereads the letter again and again. The words seem to vibrate in the hot air. Each sentence from his wife and Bonifácio resonates like an inner echo. The people want you. The time has come. Proclaim independence. He raises his eyes to his companions, their faces sunburned. All wait, frozen, hanging on his decision. Suddenly, Pedro draws his sword from its scabbard. The metal gleams under the blazing light. He brandishes it above his head and, with a voice that splits the air, cries, "Independencia ou morte," independence or death. An instant of absolute silence follows the cry, as if even nature paused to listen. Then the officers repeat in unison, "Viva o Brasil livre! Viva Dom Pedro I!" The horses rear, the swords rise, the hats fly. The cry spreads, rolls over the hill, descends toward the river, passes through the trees. 'Tis a raw, living sound that will never fade. Witnesses will later recount this scene in 1,000 ways. Some will say the sky darkened, others that a ray of light struck the sword's blade. There will be talk of silent cicadas, a sudden wind, a moment when the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The exact truth matters little. That day, Brazil rose and history found its image. The entourage moved and exalted, resumes the journey. Pedro keeps his sword drawn, its tip pointing to the sky. His men sing, laugh, weep. Some brandish their weapons. Others pick flowers from the roadside to tuck into their jackets. In their eyes, one reads the certainty of living something immense. It is not a military victory. There was no battle, no blood, no conquest. It is a victory of will. As the caravan advances, the villages it passes turn into celebrations. The inhabitants come out. Children run behind the horses. Women wave flags made of green and yellow fabric. The cry of Ipiranga travels faster than the riders. In a few days it reaches São Paulo, then Rio, then Bahia. Everywhere fires are lit, bells ring, people dance. The people do not yet understand all the consequences, but they know Brazil has been born. Meanwhile, in Rio de Janeiro, Maria Leopoldina waits, her heart pounding. The messengers sent to São Paulo have not yet brought news. Their hours stretch like days. Then one evening, a rider arrives at São Cristóvão Palace covered in dust. He bows deeply and hands over a letter. She opens it with a trembling hand. The first words are enough. Independence is proclaimed. Brazil is free. She remains still, her eyes moist, then murmurs, "Praise be to God." The bells of Rio begin to ring without any order given. Shouts erupt in the streets. The people descend toward the bay, singing. On the hills, fires light up one by one, as if the entire city pays homage to the cry of Ipiranga. Pedro, meanwhile, continues his journey to São Paulo. The notables await him in the main square. He arrives still dusty, his face grave. The crowd acclaims him. He dismounts, climbs the steps of the city hall, and proclaims again, "Brazil is free. We will never again be subjects of Portugal." The cheers are so loud, they drown out the drums and bells. Hundreds of people fall to their knees, weep, make the sign of the cross. The emotion is pure, almost religious. A young soldier will later say, "I saw a man become an empire." In the following days, Pedro has a commemorative medal struck. On one side, his profile, young and determined. On the other, a sword raised above the words, "Independencia o Morte." The first coins are distributed to the army, officers, and provincial deputies. They become the material symbol of the invisible oath made that day. The green and gold colors, already present on patriotic cockades, are officially adopted. They represent the union of the royal houses, Bragança for green, Habsburg for gold, but beyond that, they now symbolize the land and the sun, the forest and the light, Brazil and its vitality. Part 3. The Acclamation of Emperor Pedro I of Rio de Janeiro, October 12, 1822. The sun has risen over Guanabara Bay like an immense golden flag. The bells have been ringing incessantly since dawn, and in every street, every alley, green and yellow garlands float in the wind. The drums resound, the troops line up, the banners rise. Faces are turned toward the Paço Imperial, the government palace. It is the great day. Dom Pedro, regent of the kingdom, will be acclaimed constitutional emperor of Brazil. The weeks following the cry of Ipiranga were feverish. Messengers galloped in all directions to spread the news. The provinces responded with enthusiasm. Pernambuco, Minas, São Paulo, Rio Grande, all send their oaths of loyalty. Only Bahia and Maranhão still resist, held by Portuguese garrisons. But the wind of history blows too strongly. Portugal, far away, already seems to belong to another era. In Rio, José Bonifácio has orchestrated everything. He has prepared the ceremony, organized the guards, chosen the words. He knows that form will matter almost as much as substance. Brazil must appear united, at peace, confident. Independence must resemble a renaissance, not a violent rupture. Since dawn, the people have been flocking. Women wear white dresses, men green and gold cockades. Children brandish flowers and ribbons. Sailors, freed slaves, soldiers, merchants, all crowd the narrow streets of the capital. In the air, there is a joy mixed with gravity. Everyone knows they are witnessing the birth of a world. In the palace, Pedro prepares. He has donned a dark blue uniform embroidered with gold and a green sash. His sword, the same one from Ipiranga, shines at his side. On his face, tension is discernible behind the smile. He thinks of all that led him here: the king's flight, the Cortes orders, Bonifacio's advice, Leopoldina's letters. He takes a deep breath. At 23, he is about to bear an empire on his shoulders. The throne room is packed. Representatives of the provinces are there, officers, judges, clergy. Brazil's flags adorn the walls. Candelabras cast a soft light on the faces. When Pedro enters, silence falls, deep, almost religious. Then a clamor rises, powerful, spontaneous. Viva Dom Pedro I, Imperador Constitucional e Defensor Perpetuo do Brasil. The cry shakes the windows. The drums burst, the trumpets sound. Pedro advances slowly, his hand on his heart. Before him, the bishop raises a golden cross and blesses the new nation. The young sovereign kneels, then rises, his gaze turned to the crowd. It is a suspended moment, the instant when the son of the King of Portugal becomes the father of Brazil. In the street, the crowd takes up the cheers. The cannons fire from Santa Cruz Fort, their echo reverberating across the bay. Fireworks burst, even in broad daylight, tracing golden sparks against the blue sky. The ships in the port ring their bells and hoist Brazilian flags. Musicians play solemn marches, and the people dance. Never has Rio known such jubilation. It is no longer the capital of a kingdom in exile. It is the beating heart of a new empire. Pedro then delivers a brief but intensely powerful speech. Brazilians, I have accepted the crown you offer me, not for my glory, but for your freedom. We wanted peace. We were given constraint. We asked for union. We were offered submission. Today, we are what God intended us to be, a free, united, and sovereign people. His words are met with a thunder of applause. Some weep, others fall to their knees. The bells resume. At that moment, no one doubts. Brazil exists. In a corner of the room, Maria Leopoldina watches the scene with emotion. She wears a dazzling white dress, a discreet diadem in her hair. Her gaze is proud, serene. She knows that everything they did together, the nights of anguish, the secret decisions, the exchanged letters, led to this moment. When Pedro approaches her, she slightly bows her head like a queen saluting a king, but also like a wife sharing his victory. They exchange a silent smile, that of two beings who know they have just etched their names in history. Outside, the celebration extends to the sea. The inhabitants of Rio illuminate their homes with oil lamps and torches. Slaves dance on the docks, African drums mingling with European violins. Religious processions wind through the city, prayers and songs uniting in a shared fervor. All of Brazil sings its freedom with that naive and pure joy that belongs only to beginnings. The next day, the Brazilian flag is officially raised for the first time. Green and gold bearing the imperial arms, it floats in the wind above the fort and the ships. Portuguese sailors, now subjects of a new empire, salute it in silence. This piece of fabric, simple and vibrant, becomes the visible sign of what Ipiranga cried, a unique, immense, and sovereign country. But behind the triumph, Bonifácio remains lucid. He knows the hardest part is beginning. Portugal will not recognize independence without resistance. It will be necessary to negotiate, consolidate, avoid the fragmentation of the provinces. He approaches Pedro after the ceremony and murmurs, "Today, sire, you are acclaimed. Tomorrow, you will have to govern." Pedro nods. He knows the emperor he is becoming will have no room for error. The fire of the celebration must not hide the shadows of duty. In the days that follow, the excitement slowly subsides, giving way to a new calm. Rio's newspapers publish special editions celebrating the constitutional emperor of Brazil. Poets compose odes, painters sketch portraits, priests preach on divine will. The image of Pedro on horseback, sword raised, becomes the symbol of an entire generation. And in the quieter evenings at the palace, when the music fades and the city sleeps, Pedro and Leopoldina sit side by side, facing the sea. They watch the torchlight reflections on the waves. They speak little. They know they have accomplished what few men and women have had the privilege to do: give birth to a nation. Their love, born in distance and differences, has become the metaphor for the country itself, a blend of cultures, faith, courage, and dreams. Thus ends the chapter of independence, but a new era begins, that of an empire to build, a people to unite, a future to write. And in the hearts, a song remains, simple and pure, born on the banks of a river and carried to the ends of the world: Independencia o Morte. Chapter 5. The Aftermath of an Empire. Part 1. The Wars of Consolidation. The cry of Ipiranga swept through the country like lightning, but behind the brilliance the shadow of cannons remains. In September 1822, Brazil declared itself free. In 1823, it must prove it. For in the ports of the north and northeast, Bahia, Maranhão, Grão-Pará, Portuguese garrisons still hold, entrenched behind their walls, their ships, and their certainty of being Europe facing a fleeting rebellion. Independence now is no longer a phrase, it is a campaign. In Bahia, the most painful of wounds, the war began even before Ipiranga. Commander Madeira de Melo clings to Salvador like a rock amid the waves. Around the hills, suburbs, and roads are won by Brazilian patriots, militias of city dwellers, companies from the interior, freed slaves who trade chains for rifles, women who sew flags and carry ammunition. Among these faces, one stands out: Maria Quiteria, a young Bahian woman disguised as a soldier in a simple cloth tunic, bandolier across her chest, calm and determined. In an army lacking everything, she brings what cannot be manufactured: visible courage. The line is drawn around the city in a siege made of skirmishes and raids. The Portuguese bombard from the heights, attempt sorties through the gates, hold the sea with their frigates. The Brazilians advance along dirt paths, fight behind low walls, harass convoys. On November 8, 1822, at Ipiranga, the clash turns into a confused melee. Point-blank shots, drums lost in the smoke, bugles sounding unsure whether they order attack or retreat. When the dust settles, the Brazilian position still holds. It is not a resounding victory, it is better, a resistance that does not break. Winter and the rainy season wear on nerves. Hunger mingles with gunpowder, uniforms reduced to rags. But on the Brazilian side, conviction turns into stubborn patience. They dig, fortify, cut off roads, watch the horizon, for much is now decided at sea. In Rio, Pedro and José Bonifácio understand that an army without a navy will never free a coastline so vast. They seek a sailor capable of turning a few hulls into a respectable force. The name that emerges is unexpected, almost legendary. Thomas, Lord Cochrane, the Devil's Admiral, veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, already an architect of independences in Chile and Peru. They invite him, convince him. He accepts, drawn by the challenge, the ocean, this new country where everything remains to be done. In Rio's arsenal, ships are patched up, cannons armed, motley crews recruited, Brazilian sailors, rallied Portuguese, English adventurers, men of all colors united by pay and hope. The green and gold flag is hoisted on the mainmast. The Marinha do Brasil is born amid the clamor of hammers and the smell of tar. Cochrane sails toward the northeast. Before Bahia, his silhouette first provokes laughter on Portuguese decks. A new fleet? Yes, but meager, poorly supplied, undisciplined. The admiral knows the sea is won as much by audacity as by tonnage. He harasses, loose blockades, feigned attacks, quick captures of transports, nocturnal fires. In the harbor, the enemy loses supplies, confidence, sleep. By spring 1823, the noose tightens. On land, the Patriots strangle Salvador. At sea, Cochrane cuts off supplies. On July 1623, the Portuguese sails finally flee the bay. On the hills, bells ring. In the streets, people embrace. At sea, small boats set out, filled with men who held on for months with a handful of powder and much faith. Bahia is liberated. Brazil breathes, but only for a moment. For further north, Maranhão believes itself impregnable. The capital, São Luís, still has its officials, its notables loyal to Lisbon, and ships at anchor. Cochrane lacks the forces for a full assault. So he does what he has always done. He plays. Facing the authorities, he presents himself with calm assurance, speaks in the name of an empire now acclaimed everywhere, exaggerates his number of frigates, evokes imaginary reinforcements, promises clemency in case of adhesion. He fills his sails with rumors as others do with wind. The city hesitates. The fear of visible cannons mingles with the deeper fear of a political reality, isolation. Under psychological pressure, São Luís rallies. It is not a triumph of gunpowder. It is a victory of spirit, and with it, all of Maranhão shifts. The way then opens to Grão-Pará. Here, the Amazon reigns, mighty rivers, endless forests, distances that swallow armies. Portuguese power held by habit, inertia, prestige. When news from the south, empire proclaimed, Bahia liberated, Maranhão rallied, reaches Belém, a simple question crosses minds. Why resist? The local authorities eventually adhere to the Empire of Brazil. The North, at last, awakens Brazilian. These adhesions do not erase the harshness of the fight. Everywhere, it required men of the in-between, freedmen carrying cartridges, caboclos guiding columns through marshes, priests passing messages under the cover of sacristies, women tending in chapels turned into infirmaries. Independence was not the work of gilded galleries, but of calloused hands. The lists of the dead, mostly anonymous, tell the truth that medals summarize poorly. On the liberated docks, traces remain, charred planks from fires, pockmarked facades, abandoned cannons. Children play around them, not always understanding. The adults know that these ruins are the price of a new word, nation. In Rio, Pedro follows the dispatches with the impatience of a rider held back by a too tight saddle. He wants to be everywhere, salute the soldiers, thank the captains, embrace the mothers who lost their sons. Leopoldina brings him back to the empire's obligations. Troops must be paid, cities calmed, trade revived, promises to the provinces kept. Bonifácio reminds him of the other, quieter front. Diplomacy. Europe watches. England counts its interests. Lisbon still growls. International recognition will come only through negotiations, gold paid, and balances respected. When the dust of battle finally settles, the essential is secured. Bahia gave its July 2nd, celebrated as a second birth. Maranhão bowed to the calculated audacity of the sea. Grão-Pará chose the wide path of the river of the future. The maps are recolored in green and gold. Brazil, immense, holds together. But the victors do not parade for long. The wounds remain raw. Unpaid wages, grudges between provincial troops, quarrels of prestige among leaders. It is quickly forgotten that these cracks are the price of stones hastily laid to build a bridge over the political Atlantic. In the churches, Thanksgiving masses are celebrated. Names rise from the pulpit: Pirajá, Itaparica, São Luís, Belém, pronounced like an inverted rosary giving thanks for what was saved. The veterans return home, sometimes with a rusty rifle and a copper medal, often only with the memory of having held when the country needed them to hold. Thus ends the first season of the Wars of Consolidation. It was not an epic of great pitched battles, but a series of tenacious efforts, blockades, marches, choices made on the edge of doubt. In the books, dates will be remembered. In families, silences will be kept. And above the pacified ports, the green and gold flag finally flies as a promise kept. Brazil is no longer a wish, it is a reality. Part 2. International Recognition. The war offered freedom, but not yet recognition. In 1823, Brazil breathes, but its breath remains uncertain. The ports are reopened, the provinces rallied, the Portuguese flags torn down. And yet, in Europe's salons, Brazil does not exist. Diplomats in London, Paris, Vienna still speak of the Kingdom of Portugal and Brazil. On official maps, no borders have changed. And for the old King João VI, remaining on his throne in Lisbon, his son's independence is but an unfortunate disobedience. The time of arms ends, that of ambassadors begins. In his Rio office, José Bonifácio de Andrada e Silva pores over maps and dispatches. His face, tired but firm, betrays the concern of a man who knows wars are won twice, on the battlefield, then at the table. He writes to Pedro, "Sire, the world must hear us as an empire, or we will fall back into the silence of a colony." Pedro nods. He knows he needs an international seal for his throne to stand, and in this power game, one actor naturally stands out: England. For decades, the British crown has woven its web around the Atlantic. Its ships control the seas. Its gold circulates everywhere. And above all, London was Portugal's refuge during the Napoleonic Wars. Behind every Lusitanian decision often lies a British interest. Brazil, immense, rich in sugar, coffee, cotton, minerals, makes city merchants dream. But to trade freely, a recognized nation is needed, and for that, Pedro must buy legitimacy. The first emissaries set out for Europe at the end of 1823. Their mission, to convince without provoking. Brazil can afford neither arrogance nor submission. It must appear as a reasonable empire, respectful of balances, but determined to exist. In London, Brazilian ambassadors multiply receptions, conversations, economic arguments. We want to trade, not conquer. We open our ports, our markets, our alliances. The English listen, smile, but wait. For at heart, British diplomacy cares not for glory. It cares for stability. A strong but peaceful Brazil is a good client. A Brazil at war with Lisbon threatens trade routes. So London sends a clear message: secure an agreement with Portugal first. Then we will recognize you. Lisbon, meanwhile, will hear nothing of it. The old João VI, aged, cautious, remembers his son with tenderness, but also bitterness. He does not want open war. The Portuguese army is exhausted, but he refuses to cede any authority. He still hopes Pedro will come to his senses, that the Atlantic Empire will be restored under his crown. But every ship leaving Rio, every imperial decree published, distances this illusion. The fracture between father and son becomes the fracture between two worlds. Meanwhile, in Rio, the emperor grows impatient. The state's coffers are emptying, war debts pile up, the provinces demand reforms. The country must be stabilized before it unravels. So Pedro listens to his minister's advice. Peace must be bought. Not the peace of arms, but of treaties. And the price will be heavy. In 1824, negotiations accelerate in London under the discreet arbitration of British diplomats. Portugal sets its conditions. That Brazil pay an indemnity for the loss of the colony, that João VI retain the honorary title of Emperor of Brazil, and that trade between the two countries remain free. It is a thinly veiled humiliation, but a necessary passage. Bonifácio sums up the situation in a single sentence: "Freedom has a price, sire, but slavery costs even more." The negotiations drag on for months. Every clause, every comma is haggled over. The English translate, temporize, calculate. They do not want to offend Lisbon, but they sense the future lies in Rio. And in 1825, the compromise is finally reached. Brazil will pay £2 million to Portugal in exchange for official recognition of its independence. João VI, worn out by the years, signs the Treaty of Rio de Janeiro on August 29, 1825. In Europe's capitals, chancelleries record the news. Newspapers speak of an empire of the tropics, a son who buys his freedom. For the first time, Brazil's name appears alone on maps. In Rio, the news sparks an explosion of joy. The bells ring, the cannons fire, the streets fill. The inhabitants read the official posters. His Most Faithful Majesty, the King of Portugal, recognizes the independence of Brazil. People weep, embrace, thank God. What began with a cry on a river ends with a signature at the edge of the world. And yet, this signature is worth all the cries. Pedro, upon hearing the news, remains silent for a long time. He knows what this recognition costs in gold, in pride, in memories. But he also knows it is the final step of the struggle. He turns to Leopoldina and murmurs, "We have paid dearly for our freedom, but at least it is ours." She smiles, tired, proud. She knows they have achieved what so many other South American nations gained only through chaos, a recognized, stable, monarchical independence. The following years will see the Brazilian Empire weave its alliances. Consulates open in Paris, London, Vienna. Trade treaties are signed. Brazil exports its coffee, sugar, cotton, and attracts European capital. Rio's nascent aristocracy adorns itself with silk and diplomacy. But beneath the veneer of balls and uniforms, the young nation remains fragile. The provinces demand more autonomy. Debts strangle the economy. Society remains unequal, founded on slavery. The country is free, yes, but not yet just. And Pedro, despite the celebrations and praises, already feels the weight of coming disillusionments. For now, however, history pauses on an image, that of an empire recognized by the world, a people united by a flag, a young sovereign contemplating the ocean, knowing that on the other side, the old continent bows. Brazil, born of a cry and consolidated by a treaty, now steps into the century with its name etched among the nations. Part 3. Pedro's Legacy and the Memory of the Cry. When the fires of celebration die out, silence reclaims its place. Rio, after the intoxication of acclamations, rediscovers the weight of ordinary days. Ministers, budgets, quarrels, local famines, ports to maintain, schools to open. The empire exists. Now it must live as an empire. And in this patient labor, greatness is measured less by trumpets than by figures and furrowed brows. Dom Pedro I governs with fervor, sometimes with harshness, often with sincerity. He signs, decides, rides, promises. He wants to modernize laws, strengthen finances, reconcile provinces, manage powers. But storms are not lacking. Brazil, immense, is a mosaic of interests. Elites demand guarantees. Provinces envy Rio. Debts strangle. Oppositions grow. In the distance, the echo of Iberian wars and South American tensions resounds as a reminder, history grants no rest. At the heart of the palace, a soft light flickers, Maria Leopoldina. Too soon worn out by pregnancies, responsibilities, a melancholy no power can dispel, she dies in December 1826. The entire city mourns. To the people, they speak of the death of an empress. To Brazil, it is a mother who disappears. In the churches, candles burn out. In the streets, women whisper her name softly as one evokes a saint. Pedro, broken, withdraws for a time. The day her coffin is closed, it is as if all of Ipiranga is veiled in gray. For if Pedro gave the cry, Leopoldina gave it its truth. The sovereign now faces the storm alone. He remarries, strives to piece together his private life. But politics forgives nothing. Crises erupt, provincial revolts, constitutional disputes, parliamentary cabals. His enemies accuse him of authoritarianism. His supporters find him too conciliatory. He is too European for some, too Brazilian for others. And in this contradiction, the fate of men between two worlds, Pedro exhausts himself. At night, he sometimes climbs alone to the terraces overlooking the bay. The wind carries the smell of salt and wood fires. He looks at Rio's lights, the sails at anchor, and wonders if the empire he founded will survive him without tearing apart. He thinks of his son, little Pedro, with his brown curls combed for mass, his curious eyes. Perhaps the child will know how to do what the father too ardent could not. Reign long. Politics, however, waits for no reveries. In 1831, at the end of a storm of streets and debates, Pedro abdicates in favor of his son, barely 5 years old. The gesture is brief, simple, almost trivial compared to past ceremonies. Later, the manuals will read, on April 7, 1831, Dom Pedro I abdicated in favor of Dom Pedro II. A line. But for a man, it is a life that shifts. He hands over the crown and withdraws silently as one tears away a piece of oneself to give to the future. That day, the crowd does not shout. It holds its breath. Adversaries, relieved, celebrate the departure. The faithful, dignified, lower their heads. The empire remains standing, a miracle of institution strong enough to weather the storm. In a shadowy corner, an old Bahia soldier murmurs, "The man leaves, but the flag remains." The phrase is not from a poet, but it holds a country. Pedro leaves Brazil. He departs for Europe to settle Portuguese destinies, will win battles there, will die young. The sea, one last time, becomes his horizon. It is said that on board he keeps a green and gold ribbon near him, a memory of a burning morning by a narrow river. No one knows if he weeps. Emperors do not weep, or only when no one is watching. Time, however, judges differently than polemics. Dom Pedro's accounts the child will reign long. Under his calm features and scholar's glasses, Brazil will find the stability its father lacked. Schools open, telegraph lines stretch, scientists are invited. Universal exhibitions show the world the vitality of a tropical empire. And under this patient reign, the idea that the Brazilian nation is not an accident, but a work, takes deep root. But the melancholy of this chapter also lies in what was not undone immediately. The empire long rests on a shadow. Slavery. How can one sing of gained freedom when thousands of men and women are still born without it? Bonifácio had foreseen it. Pedro had sometimes said it. Leopoldina had whispered it. The future's greatness would pass through abolition. It will take decades, ardent voices, railways, books, campaigns, and the will of a princess, Isabel, for the golden law to finally break the chain in 1888. That day, the memory of the cry of Ipiranga will meet the memory of other cries, older, deeper, from the cane fields and Angola's ports. And independence will take on its true meaning. Of Pedro I, what remains then, once the centuries settle? Contradictions, of course. A fiery temperament, outbursts, mistakes. A sovereign capable of an immense gesture and errors just as great. A prince of flesh and impatience. But above all, a moment remains. A horse, a sword raised, a clear cry in the midday light. One can debate the figures, correct the accounts, discuss the consequences. What remains is that point of incandescence where a will joined a people's destiny. In schools, Ipiranga is taught by drawing a blue line in chalk to represent the river. In homes, naive prints are kept where the emperor seems larger than life. In museums, a sword shines, flags fade, medals oxidize. But the memory lives elsewhere, in the song of an anthem that begins by a stream, in the green and gold colors waving over stadiums and popular dances, in the language vast and musical, where the word Brazil rolls like a wave. And if one walks one morning to the banks of Ipiranga, one still hears, not trumpets, but a rustle of leaves, cars, voices. The city has grown, the world has changed, but beneath the modern pavement, a river of memory continues to flow. It does not speak only of a prince. It speaks of a people who recognized themselves in a single breath and decided their name would no longer be written by others. At dusk, a final image, that of Leopoldina, almost transparent in the light, placing her hand on young Pedro's shoulder before he leaves for São Paulo. That of Bonifácio bent over his maps, tracing lines that are bridges. That of a sailor with salty eyes who, in Salvador's Bay, watched Portuguese sails fade. That of a Maria Quiteria with a steady gaze, carrying her rifle higher than her fatigue. The nation is the sum of these silhouettes, known or anonymous, united by a single yes to tomorrow. Then the melancholy settles gently on the scene. The curtain does not fall. It rises on other eras, other struggles, other dreams. But each time Brazil seeks its face, it returns to the banks of the small river, where a cry, a single one, was enough to illuminate century. But all this was only the first step in Brazil's long history. Epilogue. Dom Pedro II, the reign of the wise. He was the one who made last what others had brought to life. Dom Pedro II, the child of the cry of Ipiranga, inherited a still fragile empire and made it a respected nation. When he ascended the throne, barely 14, Brazil was young, undisciplined, full of wounds to heal. When he left it, nearly half a century later, he left behind a united, educated country, turned toward the light. His reign was one of patience and knowledge. Pedro II loved books more than battles, schools more than parades. He spoke several languages, corresponded with scholars, read Voltaire, Goethe, and Victor Hugo. Under his calm gaze, Brazil's first universities flourished, newspapers multiplied, science settled in Rio's laboratories, railway tracks linked provinces, telegraph lines crossed mountains, and the country discovered the modern world without denying its tropical soul. Pedro II also knew how to be a just emperor. He visited provinces, listened to the poor, spoke to former slaves. He believed a sovereign's greatness is measured by his kindness. When he walked the streets, he greeted children by name. When he signed laws, he thought first of the people. His throne, it was said, was made more of modesty than of gold. Under his reign, Brazil knew the longest peace of its imperial history, but also its greatest pains, the Paraguayan War, terrible and devastating, which claimed so many Brazilian lives. He emerged victorious, but wounded. And it was amid these dramas that he found the strength to accomplish his greatest moral act, the abolition of slavery. In 1888, his daughter, Princess Isabel, signed the Golden Law that freed the country's last slaves. Pedro II, weakened but proud, then saw the noblest dream of his reign fulfilled. It is said he wept that day, not from sadness, but from gratitude. For Brazil had finally become worthy of his father's cry. Independence had given political freedom. Abolition gave human freedom. But the gratitude of peoples is often slower than the march of history. A year later, in 1889, the monarchy was overthrown by a military coup. Pedro II refused to shed blood to keep his throne. He left Brazil without anger, simply as one leaves a beloved home grown too small for the dream it carried. He died in exile in Paris in 1891 with a handful of Brazilian soil in his hands. And yet, time did him justice. His reign, nearly half a century long, remains that of stability, culture, and progress. He brought Brazil into the modern world without losing it. Under his calm face, behind his patriarch's beard and thoughtful eyes, the country learned to stand tall, to read, to create, to think. Even today, Brazilians call him O Magnânimo, the magnanimous. He was the philosopher king, the humanist emperor, the one who made the youth of an empire the time of its wisdom. Brazil's history will continue in a future video under the reign of Dom Pedro I and the end of the monarchy. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through history. I hope this tale has brought you peace and wonder. Don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories to guide you into a serene sleep. Take care and see you soon